Introduction. Buddhism, one of the major religions of the world, has its roots in ancient India. Over the centuries, the philosophy and teachings of Buddhism have spread to other parts of Asia, including China, Japan, Vietnam, Korea, and Tibet. Despite the similarities in their origin, the Buddhist traditions in different countries have developed unique characteristics and practices, reflecting the influence of local cultures and beliefs. This essay explores the differences in philosophy and religious practices between Buddhism in India and Buddhism in other Asian countries. Historical background. Buddhism originated in ancient India in the 6th century BC, when Siddhartha Gautama, a prince from the Shakya clan, renounced his privileged life and set out to seek enlightenment. After 6 years of meditation and spiritual practice, he achieved enlightenment under a Bodhi tree in the town of Bodh Gaya. He became known as the Buddha, or the Awakened One, and began to teach his philosophy to others. The teachings of the Buddha spread rapidly throughout India, and by the 3rd century BC, Buddhism had become a major religion in the region. However, as Buddhism spread to other parts of Asia, it began to evolve and adapt to local cultures and beliefs. Differences in philosophy. One of the key differences between Buddhism in India and other Asian countries is in their philosophical emphasis. In India, Buddhism is primarily focused on the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. The Four Noble Truths are the foundation of Buddhist philosophy, and they state that suffering exists, suffering arises from craving, suffering ceases when craving ceases, and the Eightfold Path leads to the cessation of suffering. In contrast, Buddhism in other Asian countries places more emphasis on the concept of emptiness or sunyata. This concept holds that all things are empty of inherent existence, and that the ultimate reality is beyond all concepts and dualities. This emphasis on emptiness is particularly pronounced in the Mahayana branch of Buddhism, which is prevalent in China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and Tibet. Another important difference in philosophy is the role of the bodhisattva. In Indian Buddhism, the goal of spiritual practice is to achieve personal liberation or nirvana. However, Mahayana Buddhism places a greater emphasis on the bodhisattva, who is a being who has achieved enlightenment but chooses to remain in the world to help others achieve liberation. Differences in religious practices. In addition to differences in philosophy, there are also differences in religious practices between Buddhism in India and other Asian countries. One of the most notable differences is in the use of different scriptures. In India, the primary scriptures of Buddhism are the Pali Canon and the Sanskrit Sutras. In other Asian countries, different collections of scriptures are used, such as the Chinese Canon, the Tibetan Canon, and the Korean Tripitaka. Another significant difference is in the use of rituals and devotional practices. In India, Buddhism has a more intellectual and meditative approach to spiritual practice, and there is less emphasis on ritual and devotion. In contrast, in other Asian countries, Buddhism is often practiced alongside other religious traditions, such as Confucianism and Taoism in China, or Shintoism in Japan. As a result, there is often a greater emphasis on rituals, offerings, and devotional practices in these countries. Impact of differences in philosophy and religious practices. The differences in philosophy and religious practices between Buddhism in India and other Asian countries have had a significant impact on the way Buddhism is practiced in these regions. One of the most notable impacts has been on the types of spiritual practices that are emphasized. In India, the focus on the